Hey guys, tonight we're going to peel back the layers of glossy paper, push aside the modern tinsel, and blow the dust off the ancient, snow-covered roots of the world's most famous holiday. We're going to travel back through centuries of winter nights to find out where the traditions you know and love actually came from. You might think you know the story, but the history of this midwinter celebration is a tapestry woven from Roman parties, Norse fires, and quiet miracles. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why we drag pine trees indoors or why we hang socks by the fireplace. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. I'd love to hear where you're tucked in tonight, or when you first clicked on this video. Maybe just leave a gentle compliment if you're enjoying the vibe. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You're drifting away from your room now. The familiar shapes of your furniture dissolve into a soft, grey mist. The air grows cooler, crisp and damp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat. The ground beneath your feet hardens, transforming from carpet to cobblestone. You're standing in the heart of ancient Rome. It is the 17th of December, a date that marks the beginning of the most anticipated festival in the Roman calendar, Saturnalia. The sky above is a heavy, wintry grey, but the streets around you are alive with colour. You might expect to see the stoic, white toga-wearing Romans you've seen in history books. But today, everything is different. You notice that the stiff, formal togas have been cast aside. Instead, the people bustling past you are wearing the synthesis, a colourful, loose-fitting garment that was usually considered too tacky for public wear. It's essentially the ancient equivalent of an ugly Christmas sweater party. Everyone looks a little ridiculous. But that is entirely the point. You walk slowly toward the Forum Romanum. The noise of the city is usually a roar of commerce and politics, but today it is a roar of celebration. You hear a shout echoing off the marble pillars Io Saturnalia. It is the greeting of the season, shouted by strangers to strangers, a password that unlocks a week of absolute chaos and joy. You feel the vibration of the shout in your chest, a deep, resonant sound that signals the suspension of all normal rules. At the base of the Capitoline Hill, you see the Temple of Saturn. This is the focal point of the energy here. Saturn was the god of agriculture, the deity who presided over a mythical golden age when humans lived in perfect equality and abundance, without labour or strife. You watch as a priest performs a solemn ritual. For most of the year, the statue of Saturn inside the temple is bound at the feet with wool bonds, symbolising that the chaotic forces of the god are contained. But today, you see those wool bonds loosened. The god is untied. The symbolism is potent for the next week. The strict order of Roman society is unravelled. Just like those woolen knots, you drift further into the city, guided by the flickering light of oil lamps and torches. The sun sets early in December, even in the Mediterranean, and the Romans fight back the dark with fire. This is where you encounter the most disorienting and fascinating aspect of Saturnalia. You peek through the open atrium of a wealthy household. Inside, a banquet is in full swing. The table is groaning under the weight of roasted pork, heavy breads, and amphorae of wine. But look closely at the people. Reclining on the couches, eating the finest food, are the slaves, serving them, pouring their wine and clearing their plates, are the masters. It is a world turned upside down. You watch a wealthy senator, a man who usually holds the power of life and death over his household, laughing as he refills the cup of his kitchen servant. It is a mesmerising piece of social theatre. Historians still argue whether this role reversal was a genuine moment of empathy and humanity, or merely a safety valve, a way to let off steam so the rigid social hierarchy wouldn't explode later in the year. Regardless of the intent for the people in that room, the relief is palpable. You notice something on the heads of the revellers. Everyone, including the slaves, is wearing a pileus. It's a soft, conical felt cap that looks a bit like the top half of a gnome in normal times. This hat is only worn by freed slaves to mark their liberty, but during Saturnalia, everyone wears it. It is a visual equalizer. For a few days, everyone is free. You can imagine the feeling of that soft felt on your own head, a symbol that you have no obligations, no work, no deadlines. You are simply existing in the moment of the feast. As you wander away from the banquet, you find yourself in a bustling market. The serious business of the courts and the schools is suspended. Instead, the streets are filled with gambling. You see men crouching over dice games in public, shouting and cheering. Normally, gambling for money is illegal in Rome, strictly forbidden by the serious-minded Senate. But under the gaze of the unbound Saturn, the laws sleep. You watch the dice tumble across the paving stones, ivory cubes with pips painted in black and red. The sound of them clicking against the stone is rhythmic, almost hypnotic, like raindrops falling on a roof. The air smells of wax. You see people exchanging gifts, a tradition that feels incredibly familiar to you. But they aren't exchanging gift cards or electronics. They're giving each other seri-tall, white wax tapers. You watch a father hand one to his son. The flame flickers in the winter wind. A tiny piece of the sun brought down to earth. These candles were more than just lights. They were symbols of the returning light of the solstice, a promise that the sun would not abandon them to the winter darkness forever. There are other gifts, too. You see stalls selling sigillaria, small terracotta figurines. Some look like gods, others like heroes, and some are grotesque. Funny little characters. People buy them in handfuls to give to friends and family. It's a quirky little precursor to the action figures and dolls we wrap up today. There is a sweetness to it. Seeing a rugged Roman soldier laughing as he buys a tiny clay doll for his child. It reminds you that despite the centuries that separate you from him, the desire to see someone smile at a small trinket is universal. Of course, the party isn't just about candles and dolls. It is raucous. The wine flows freely, perhaps too freely. You might chuckle to yourself thinking that this was basically the HR nightmare of the ancient world. The blurring of lines between boss and employee, the excessive drinking, the unfiltered speech. It's a recipe for awkward mornings after. The satirist Horace called it December liberty, a time when even the most stoic philosophers were told to loosen up and stop being such a buzzkill. You feel a heavy, comfortable drowsiness settling over you as you watch the scenes unfold. The noise of the revelry seems to be muffled, as if you're wearing thick earmuffs. You're merely a ghost in this ancient city, safe and unseen. You walk past a house where a Saturnalicius princeps has been elected a mock king of Saturnalia. In this house, the dice determined that a lowly servant would be the king for the evening. You see him issuing ridiculous commands to his master: sing a song naked or dunk your head in a bucket of ice water. The master obeys, and the room erupts in laughter. It is a release of tension, a moment where the heavy armour of Roman dignity is allowed to crack. But beneath the laughter and the wine, you sense a deeper current. You feel the cold creeping in from the Tiber River. The days are short, the nights are long and filled with shadows. All of this, the lights, the noise. The feasting is a collective act of defiance against the winter. The Romans, masters of the known world, conquerors of nations, were still at the mercy of the seasons. They feared the dark just as we do. And so, They built a fortress of joy in the middle of the bleakest month. You find a quiet corner near a fountain. The water trickles softly, a counterpoint to the distant singing. You observe the transition of the festival. Originally, Saturnalia was just one day, but the people loved it so much, and the emperors found it so useful for keeping the populace happy, that it expanded. 3 days, 5 days. Eventually, an entire week of legal holiday. It seems the desire to extend the holiday break is another thing that hasn't changed in 2,000 years. As you sit there, invisible on the stone bench, you watch the torches burn down. The wax drips slowly, counting the hours. The shouting softens into murmurs. The city begins to sleep, exhausted by its own joy. You realize that while the specific gods and the toga styles have faded into history, the spirit of this week remains untouched. The inversion of order, the generosity to those with less, the desperate need to light a candle against the encroaching dark. It is all right here. In the shadow of the Capitoline Hill, the Io Saturnalia chants fade into a rhythmic whisper. The heavy woolen bonds of Saturn wait to be tied again. But for now, the world is loose, free and drifting. You take one last look at the temple, the firelight dancing on the columns, and you feel the scene beginning to shift. The Mediterranean air, heavy with wine and oil, begins to thin. The stone streets dissolve. You are moving north, away from the structured chaos of Rome, toward a different kind of winter. A darker, wilder winter where the trees are tall and the snow is deep. You leave the warm, wine-scented streets of Rome behind you. The image of the marble temples fades into a swirling white mist, and the temperature drops rapidly. You feel the air change against your skin. The soft Mediterranean breeze is replaced by a biting, icy wind that carries the sharp, clean scent of pine needles and frozen earth. As the mist clears, you find yourself standing in a landscape that feels vast, ancient, and deeply silent. You're in the dense, snow-laden forests of northern Europe, among the Germanic and Norse tribes. The year is elusive, perhaps the 4th or 5th century, but the season is unmistakable. It is Yule, or Yule, the deep midwinter. Here, the winter is not just a season, it is a formidable opponent. You look up and see that the sun is a pale, watery disk hugging the horizon, barely providing enough light to cast a shadow. In these northern latitudes, the darkness is overwhelming. It swallows the afternoon by 3:00 p.m. and doesn't let go until late the next morning. You can feel the primal anxiety that comes with this endless night. For these people, there is no guarantee that the sun will ever return to its full strength. The world feels like it is holding its breath, poised on the edge of eternal winter. You're standing at the edge of a clearing, watching a group of men and women engaged in a task of immense physical exertion. They're not shopping for gifts or hanging tinsel. They're hauling a massive oak tree through the snow. This is the original Yule log. Forget the tidy, manageable logs you might buy at a supermarket today, or the looping video of a fireplace you watch on Netflix. This is an entire tree, chosen with great care from the forest, limbed and dragged by ropes and sheer muscle power toward the longhouse. You trudge alongside them, your boots crunching loudly on the hard-packed snow. The sound is crisp and rhythmic. You can see their breath pluming in the air like dragon smoke. There is a sense of urgency in their movements. They're bringing the forest inside. They're bringing the raw fuel of life into their home to combat the freezing death outside. You arrive at the longhouse, a low, timber-framed building with a sod roof buried under a thick blanket of snow. You duck your head to enter through the heavy wooden door. Inside, the atmosphere is a shock to the senses. After the biting cold of the forest, the air here is thick, warm, and smoky. A central fire pit dominates the room, and this is where the massive log is destined. You watch as they maneuver the trunk, feeding the thick end into the flames. This is the heartbeat of the Yule celebration. The lighting of the log is a ritual. You might notice that they kindle the new fire using a charred remnant of the log from last year's Yule. It is a beautiful, seamless loop of continuity. The fire never truly dies. It just sleeps for a year before waking up again. It's a bit like keeping a sourdough starter alive. But with much higher stakes. If the fire goes out, it's not just a ruined loaf of bread, it's an omen of bad luck for the entire household. You find a place to sit on a fur-covered bench near the hearth. The heat radiates against your face, melting the frost on your eyelashes. This fire must burn continuously for 12 days. As the log burns down, they will simply shove more of the trunk into the pit. This is likely the origin of the 12 days of Christmas span that we sing about today. Though back then, it wasn't about partridges or pear trees. It was about survival and ensuring the sun would turn the corner. Speaking of turning, historians and linguists still argue whether the word Yule comes from a root word meaning play, or, more likely, from the word whale, meaning wheel. You gaze into the spinning sparks of the fire and consider the wheel of the year. The winter solstice is the bottom of that wheel, the turning point where the descent into darkness stops and the slow climb back to the light begins. You're witnessing the friction of that wheel turning, ignited in the form of an oak tree. The mood inside the longhouse is not solemn, though it is rowdy. Horns of ale and mead are passed around. You watch a burly warrior wipe foam from his moustache and laugh. They're drinking to the gods, to the ancestors, and to the harvest. This is the ancient tradition of wassailing, a word that comes from the Old Norse veshel, meaning be healthy. You realise that your modern toast of cheers is a faint echo of this boisterous, life-affirming roar in the face of winter. On the spit above the fire, a boar is roasting. The fat drips into the flames, causing them to hiss and flare. This is the Sonagolta, the sacrificial boar of atonement. You watch as men lay their hands on the boar's bristles to swear solemn oaths for the coming year. It's a serious business, making a promise on a pig, but it was legally binding in their eyes. This roasted beast is the great-great-grandfather of the Christmas ham you might eat today. It's comforting to know that for thousands of years, humans have decided that the best way to handle the cold is to eat pork and drink fermented honey. But outside the warm, smoky safety of the longhouse, the world is not just cold, it is haunted. You step back out into the night for a moment, just to feel the contrast. The sky is a vast canopy of stars, sharper and brighter than you have ever seen them. You hear the wind howling through the treetops. To the people inside, that isn't just wind, that is the wild hunt. You look up, half expecting to see them. The legends say that during Yule, the barrier between the worlds of the living and the dead grows thin. The sky becomes a highway for a ghostly procession led by the god Odin. He rides his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, thundering across the night sky with a retinue of howling ghosts, hunting for souls. You shiver, not just from the cold. Odin, in this guise, is known as Jolner, the Yule One. He is often depicted as an old man with a long white beard, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a blue cloak. Sound familiar? While he is much scarier than the jolly man we know, you certainly wouldn't want to catch him coming down your chimney. He is undeniably a piece of the puzzle. The advice of the time was to stay indoors, stay warm, and keep your head down. It's basically the ancient version of a severe weather warning, but with more ghosts. There is a fascinating duality here that you can sense. Yule is a celebration of light, but it is deeply respectful of the dark. You notice boughs of holly and evergreen branches hung around the doorways and windows. Unlike the deciduous trees that stand like skeletons in the snow, these plants stay green. They hold on to life when everything else has surrendered. You reach out and touch the prickly leaf of a holly bush. By bringing these greens inside, the people believe they were offering a warm refuge for the woodland spirits, keeping the essence of nature alive until spring. It's a quirky thought that your Christmas tree originally started as a guest house for fairies and elves to crash in during the winter storm. You move back inside, drawn by the laughter. The fear of the wild hunt fades in the glow of the hearth. You watch as someone scoops up a handful of ash from the burnt log. They won't throw this away. They will spread it in the fields to ensure a good harvest, or keep it under the bed to protect the house from lightning. It is magical dust, transformed by the holy fire. The fascinating thing about this scene is how devoid of Christianity it is, yet how completely Christmas it feels. The log, the ham, the wreath, the singing, the toasts, the old bearded man in the sky, the stage is set, the props are all here. They're just waiting for a new script to be written for them. You lean back against a wooden post, the drone of conversation acting like a lullaby. The smell of the roasting meat is heavy and savoury. You feel a deep, primal sense of safety. This is what winter festivals are ultimately about, pushing back the fear of the dark with light, food, and community. Whether you're a Roman senator in a silk synthesis or a Norse hunter in bear furs, the human need is exactly the same. We need to know that the sun will come back. As the fire crackles and pops, sending a shower of sparks up toward the smoke hole in the roof, you watch the embers pulse. They glow with a deep, mesmerizing orange heat. The image of the burning log begins to blur. The rough timber walls of the longhouse seem to smooth out. The smell of pine and roasting pork fades, replaced by something different, the scent of incense and damp stone. You're drifting south again, and forward in time, but the theme of light conquering darkness remains your guide. The wild, untamed magic of the Germanic forests is being left behind for something more structured, more mysterious, and centered around a very specific date that is about to become the most important birthday in history. The roaring hearth of the Norse longhouse fades into a singular steady flame. You're no longer in the wild forests of the north. The air is warmer now, but still crisp with the chill of late December. You open your eyes to find yourself descending into the belly of the earth. You're walking down a narrow, stone-cut staircase in the heart of Rome, sometime in the 3rd century AD. The noise of the city above the carts, the shouting, the wind is muffled by layers of rock. You step into a subterranean chamber, a Mithraeum. It is a long, cave-like room, designed to mimic the cosmos. The ceiling is painted a deep, midnight blue and studded with gold stars that flicker in the light of oil lamps. You feel a sense of hushed secrecy here. This is not a public temple like the ones in the Forum. This is a place for initiates, a brotherhood of soldiers, merchants, and bureaucrats who worship a god who came from the East Mithras. You watch as men file in, their faces serious and shadowed. They are members of a mystery cult that rivals Christianity in its popularity and intensity. At the far end of the chamber is a relief carving, illuminated by flickering candles. It depicts a young, handsome god in a Phrygian cap, a soft, conical hat similar to the one the freed slaves wore during Saturnalia slaying a bull. This is the Tauroctony, the central image of their faith. But you are here for a specific celebration. It is December 25th. For these men, today is the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun. You find a spot in the shadows along the stone benches that line the walls. The air smells of burning pine cones and the metallic tang of spilled blood from a ritual sacrifice. You observe the priest, known as the Pater, raising a chalice of wine. The atmosphere is thick with expectation, just like the Norsemen in the north. These Romans are obsessed with the solstice. But for them, it is less about survival against the cold and more about a cosmic victory. The sun has reached its lowest point. It has been conquered by the shortening days. But today, On the 25th, according to the Julian calendar's calculation of the solstice, the sun proves it cannot be killed. It turns around, it begins to rise again. It is Invictus unconquered. You watch the faces of the worshippers. There is a look of fierce hope in their eyes. The Emperor Aurelian, a tough soldier emperor who needed to unite a fracturing empire, made this cult official in 274 AD. He declared Sol Invictus the supreme god of the Roman Empire. You realise the brilliance of this political move. In a sprawling empire of 1,000 different gods, everyone could agree on the sun. It shines on everyone. It is the ultimate source of life. By aligning the emperor with the unconquered sun, Aurelian was saying, the empire, like the sun, will rise again. As you observe the ritual, you can't help but notice the eerie parallels. These men share a communal meal of bread and wine. They call each other brother. Or they believe in a saviour god who was born from a rock, a virgin birth of sorts, and who offers salvation and a passage to the afterlife. Historians still argue whether Christianity borrowed these elements from Mithraism or if both religions simply grew out of the same cultural soil. Sharing the common language of the time, it's a bit like two different movies released in the same summer blockbuster season. They might have different plots, but they use the same special effects and cater to the same audience. But the cult of Mithras isn't the only game in town on this date. You drift out of the Mithraeum, floating up through the stone ceiling, back into the open air of Rome. The sun is setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. You see crowds gathering on the hills. They are lighting bonfires, a mirrored reflection of the sun they are trying to encourage. This date, December 25th, was a magnetic pole for celebration long before it was Christmas. It was the winter solstice in the Roman calendar. It was the tipping point. You feel the psychological weight of this. If you are an ancient person, without NASA charts or weather apps, the dying of the sun was a terrifying reality. When you saw it stop dipping lower on the horizon and start to climb back up, that wasn't just astronomy, that was a miracle. That was a birthday. You walk through a neighbourhood where the doors are marked with symbols. You see the Chiro, the symbol of the Christians, scratched discreetly on a doorpost. They are here too, living alongside the worshippers of Sol. You can imagine the tension and the dialogue between neighbours. A Mithraist might say to a Christian, "Why don't you join us for the Feast of the Sun?" And the Christian, perhaps feeling a bit left out of the biggest party of the year, might start to wonder how to bridge that gap. There is a quirky historical tidbit here that you might enjoy. Some early Christian writers actually got quite annoyed by the comparison. St. Augustine, writing much later, had to tell Christians, "We hold this day holy, not like the pagans because of the birth of the sun, but because of the birth of him who made the sun." The very fact that he had to say that tells you people were confused. The branding was overlapping. You stand on the rooftop, looking out over the 7 hills of Rome. You see the fires of Saturnalia dying down, and the fires of Sol Invictus flaring up. It is a city of light. You realise that the choice of December 25th for Christmas wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random dart throw at a calendar. It was a strategic, genius act of cultural squatting. The church didn't just pick a date. They picked the date. They moved into the prime real estate of the calendar. Imagine trying to launch a new holiday today. If you put it on August 14th, nobody cares. But if you say, "Hey, we have a new holiday, and it's going to be on Super Bowl Sunday," you instantly inherit the energy, the gathering, and the attention of the existing event. That is what happened here. The unconquered sun became the unconquered sun. The light of the world was simply recaptioned. As you stand there, the wind picks up, blowing the smoke of the bonfires toward you. It swirls around you, obscuring the Roman skyline. You feel a shift in the atmosphere. The heavy, stone reality of Rome begins to soften. The chanting of the Mithraic priests fades into a low hum. You are moving away from the imperial city, away from the political manoeuvrings of emperors and cults. The darkness deepens, but it is a different kind of dark. It is the velvet darkness of a desert night. The smell of sulphur and city dust is replaced by the scent of dry sage and sheep wool. The noise of the city falls away completely, leaving only the sound of wind whistling over dunes. You're travelling east now, far from the centres of power. You're heading towards a small, insignificant province in the Roman Empire, to a quiet hillside where history is about to be written not in stone, but in starlight. The grand, loud celebrations of Rome feel like a distant memory. Here, in the silence, you're about to encounter the story that would eventually swallow Sol Invictus whole. You look up. The sky is dominant here, and there, hanging low and bright, is a star that seems to be waiting for you. Or perhaps it is a planet, or a comet. You're about to step into the mystery of the Nativity, where faith meets astronomy, and where the timeline gets a little blurry. You leave the grand, marble-clad celebrations of Rome far behind. The chanting of the Mithraic priests and the roar of the Saturnalia crowds fade into the vast, absorbing silence of the Judean wilderness. You're standing now on a rocky hillside, about 6 miles south of Jerusalem. The year is harder to pin down. It might be 4 BC, or perhaps 6 BC. The timeline here is a little hazy, like a mirage shimmering over the desert floor, but the ground beneath your boots is solid and real. You feel the sharp drop in temperature that characterizes the desert night. The air is incredibly dry, sucking the moisture right off your skin. It smells of limestone dust, crushed herbs like hyssop and thyme, and the faint musky scent of sheep. You wrap your cloak tighter around yourself. Above you, the sky is an endless dome of velvet, pierced by stars so bright they look like holes punched through to heaven. In a world without light pollution, the Milky Way looks like a spilled river of milk, thick and luminous. You look down into the valley. You see the flickering lights of a small, terraced village clinging to the ridge. This is Bethlehem. It's not a mighty city, it's a little town, just as the songs say, but tonight it is teeming with people. You can hear the distant murmur of voices, the braying of donkeys, and the clanging of cooking pots. The village is bursting at the seams. This overcrowding brings you to one of the great historical puzzles of the story. You're witnessing the result of a bureaucratic decree. The Gospel of Luke tells us that Caesar Augustus issued a decree that all the world should be taxed, and that everyone had to return to their ancestral home to register. You watch as tired families trudge up the steep path. They're here because of the census of Quirinius. However, as you watch the weary travellers, you might spot a historian sitting on a nearby rock, looking confused. Here is the snag history records that Quirinius became governor of Syria in 6 AD, which is 10 years after King Herod the Great died. But the Gospel of Matthew tells us Jesus was born while Herod was still alive. It's a 10-year gap that doesn't quite fit. Historians still argue whether the writer of the Gospel made a chronological error, or if there was an earlier, smaller census that the history books missed. It's the ancient equivalent of a filing error at the DMV, but one that has puzzled scholars for 2 millennia. Regardless of the paperwork problems, the human reality before you is undeniable. You walk down the hillside and enter the village. The streets are narrow, winding alleyways of pale stone. You step aside to let a man leading a donkey pass. On the donkey sits a young woman, heavy with child. The image is iconic, but as you follow them, the story shifts from the Christmas card version to something more historically grounded. They are looking for a place to stay. You know the line. There was no room for them in the inn. Psst. You might be picturing a rude innkeeper slamming a heavy oak door in their faces, pointing to a no vacancy sign. But let's look closer at the architecture of the house they approach. In 1st century Judea, a typical home had a large guest chamber called a catalemma. This is the word often translated as inn, but it really just means guest room. You peer into the house. It's a single-storey stone structure. The main family living area is on a raised platform. The lower area, near the door, is dirt-floored. This is where the family's animals, a cow, a donkey, maybe a few sheep would be brought in at night to keep them safe and to help eat the house. You realise that there isn't a cruel innkeeper sending them to a separate, drafty barn. The situation is more like a family visiting relatives, but the guest room, the catalemma, is already packed with other cousins who got there first. So, the family invites them into the main living space. You watch as they settle into the lower level, the animal quarters. It's intimate, crowded, and warm. The manger isn't a rickety wooden cradle filled with golden straw. You see a stone trough carved directly into the floor, usually used to feed the donkey. They fill it with fresh hay. It's practical. It's sturdy. It's a scene of humble hospitality, not rejection. The story you're seeing is actually deeper than the one you were told. It's about a family making space in a crowded house, surrounded by the breath of animals and the smell of wood smoke. You step back outside to give them privacy. You look up at the sky again. There is something happening up there that demands your attention. You're looking for the Star of Bethlehem. For centuries, astronomers have been spinning their own star maps to figure out what this celestial beacon actually was. You scan the constellations. Was it a supernova? A star exploding in a final, brilliant death throw? Chinese astronomers recorded a guest star, a nova, in the constellation of Capricorn in 5 BC. That lines up pretty well. Or was it a comet? You might think of Halley's Comet, which swooped by in 12 BC, but that's a bit too early. Plus, in the ancient world, comets were usually seen as bad omens, harbingers of doom and plague, not exactly the "we have a baby" announcement you'd want. But then you see two planets slowly drifting closer together. Jupiter and Saturn. In the year 7 BC, these two giants engaged in a rare triple conjunction. They met in the sky 3 separate times within a few months. To the ancient astrologers, this was headline news. Jupiter was the king planet. Saturn was often associated with the Jewish people, and this meeting took place in the constellation of Pisces. You can almost read the celestial text message, King of the Jews in Judea. This brings us to the travellers you see approaching from the east. You watch a caravan of camels moving silently over the dunes. These are the Magi. You've probably heard them called the Three Kings, but notice that they aren't wearing crowns. They're wearing tall, conical hats and heavy, embroidered robes. They look Persian. They're likely Zoroastrian priests, astronomers, and scholars from the Parthian Empire. And here's a fun fact to tuck away: the Bible never actually says there were 3 of them. It only says they brought 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. For all we know, there could have been a dozen of them, or just 2 guys with a very heavy packing list. But you watch them navigating by the conjunction of the planets, ancient scientists following the data to its conclusion. You might be wondering about the shepherds, too. You see them out on the hills, huddled around small fires, watching their flocks. This is another clue that helps us decode the calendar. If this were truly December 25th in Judea, it would be the rainy season. It's cold, wet, and miserable. The sheep would likely be corralled indoors. The fact that the shepherds are abiding in the fields suggests that you're actually standing in the spring, perhaps during lambing season, or maybe in the early autumn. The December date, as you remember from our time in Rome, was borrowed later to align with parties everyone was already attending. As you stand on the ridge, looking between the crowded stone house and the vast starry sky, you feel the profound quiet at the centre of the story. It is a moment of calm in a chaotic world. Whether you view this through the lens of faith or strictly as history, the scene is arresting. A child is born in a stone-feeding trough in a small, occupied country under the gaze of a foreign empire. While the planets dance a rare waltz overhead, you watch the Magi arrive. They don't belong here. They're exotic, wealthy, and strange. Their presence adds a layer of mystery and international intrigue to the scene. They bring gold for a king, frankincense incense for a deity, and myrrh. You smell the myrrh. It has a bitter, earthy fragrance. It was an expensive resin used in perfume, but also in embalming. It's a slightly morbid baby shower gift, hinting that this child's story won't be an easy one. The wind shifts, blowing dust across the valley. The scene of the Nativity begins to feel like a tableau, a frozen moment in time that has been painted and repainted for 2,000 years. You see the edges of the vision softening. The bright, sharp stars of the desert night begin to blur into streaks of light. The smell of the sheep and the dry earth fades. You are drifting away from the quiet hills of Bethlehem. The silence is broken by the sound of chanting. But it's not the solitary prayer of a desert mystic. It is the organized, rhythmic chanting of a choir. You're moving forward in time, watching as this quiet, dusty story is picked up like a seed and carried by the winds of history. It is about to be planted in the fertile soil of the Roman Empire, where it will undergo a transformation so radical that the Jewish peasants you just saw would barely recognize it. The stars above you rearrange themselves. The rough stone of the Judean hillside smooths out into polished marble and stained glass. You're entering the age of adoption, where the old gods of the harvest and the sun don't disappear, they just get new names. The great experiment of mixing religions is about to begin. You drift away from the dusty starlit silence of the Judean hills. The humble stone trough and the breathing of the livestock fade into the mists of time. You feel the ground beneath your feet harden and smooth out, transforming from the rough earth of a village path into cool, polished marble. The air changes, too. The dry desert wind is replaced by the heavy, resinous scent of frankincense and the damp, cool atmosphere of a vast indoor space. You open your eyes and find yourself standing in the nave of a great basilica in Rome. It is the mid-4th century. The world has shifted on its axis again. The underground cult you saw in the catacombs, the one marked by the secret Chi Rho symbol, has ascended to the throne. Christianity is no longer a persecuted whisper. It is the official religion of the Roman Empire. But as you look around this magnificent hall watching the light stream through the high windows, you sense a tension in the air. The church has won the political battle. But it is still fighting for the calendar. You walk softly toward the apse, your footsteps echoing in the vastness. You see men in heavy, ornate vestments gathered in a circle, their voices low and urgent. They are bishops and scribes, the architects of a new era. They have a problem. You listen closely to their hushed debate. They are discussing the people outside the common citizens of Rome. Despite the new cross on the altar, the people of Rome are still Romans. They still love their parties. You remember the raucous energy of Saturnalia we visited earlier, the gambling, the drinking, the role reversals. You remember the solemn fires of Sol Invictus on December 25th. The bishops know that you can convert a man's soul, but it is much harder to convert his social calendar. If you tell a Roman he can't have a party in December, he's likely to ignore you, or worse, revolt. You watch as a figure commands the room. It is Pope Julius I. He looks tired, the weight of a spiritual empire on his shoulders. He rubs his temples. He knows that trying to ban the midwinter festivals is a losing battle. It would be like trying to cancel the weekend. So, you watch as a brilliant, pragmatic idea forms in the room. If they can't stop the party, they will take it over. They will perform the greatest corporate rebranding in history. This is the birth of the great syncretism experiment. Syncretism is a fancy word for blending two different beliefs into a new, cohesive whole. It's like cooking a new dish using the ingredients that are already in the pantry. You watch as Julius and his advisors look at the calendar. December 25th. It's already the biggest day of the year. The Mithraists are celebrating the birthday of the unconquered sun. The Saturnalia revellers are just recovering from their hangovers. The infrastructure of joy is already there. Why not? You hear the whisper drift through the basilica. Make this the birthday of the true light. You see a scribe dipping a quill into an ink pot. He begins to write on a sheet of vellum. He is drafting the chronography of 354, a document that will contain the very first recorded mention of Christmas, being celebrated on December 25th. You watch the ink dry, glistening in the candlelight. With that stroke of the pen, the Sun of Righteousness replaces the unconquered sun. It is a masterstroke. The Christians can now tell their pagan neighbours, "Oh, you're celebrating the light returning, so are we. We just have a different name for the source of that light." But as you stand there, absorbing this moment of decision, you should know that historians still argue whether this was purely a marketing move or if there was some deeper math involved. This is where you might chuckle at the mental gymnastics of ancient scholars. There is a theory called the calculation hypothesis. It goes like this: ancient tradition held that great prophets died on the same date they were conceived. They believed Jesus was crucified on March 25th around the spring equinox. Therefore, he must have been conceived on March 25th. And if you add exactly 9 months to March 25th, where do you land December 25th? It's a neat, tidy mathematical bow. Whether the church retrofitted the math to match the party, or whether the party just happened to match the math, is a debate that keeps academics awake at night. But standing here in the basilica, you feel the result is the same. The date is set, the anchor is dropped. You turn your gaze to a mosaic being assembled on the wall. You see an artist carefully placing small, glittering tiles of gold and glass. He is creating an image of Christ. But look closely at the iconography. The figure is riding a chariot. He has rays of light exploding from his head. If you didn't know better, you'd swear it was Apollo or Helios, the sun gods. And you'd be right. The visual language is being adopted too. The halo that you see in every Renaissance painting that started here. As the sun rays of the pagan solar deities, the church didn't just move into the pagan calendar, they moved into their wardrobe too. Now, let the scene shift. You walk out of the Roman basilica, and the warm Mediterranean air instantly vanishes. The marble floor turns into damp, crunching leaves. You're moving north again, crossing the Alps, flashing forward a few centuries to the early Middle Ages. You're in England now, standing in the misty grove of oak trees near Canterbury. You see a monk standing before an old moss-covered pagan shrine. This is a missionary sent by Pope Gregory the Great. He looks uncertain. He has a hammer in his hand, ready to smash the stone idols of the Anglo-Saxons. But then a messenger arrives. You watch as the messenger hands him a letter from the Pope. This letter is one of the most famous internal memos in history. You lean over the monk's shoulder to read the Latin script. Pope Gregory is giving instructions that are shockingly tolerant. He tells the missionary, "Do not destroy the temples. Instead, destroy the idols. But sprinkle the temples with holy water. Build altars and place relics there." Why? Because, as Gregory writes, he who endeavours to ascend to the highest place rises by degrees or steps, and not by leaps. He essentially says, Don't take away their clubhouse, just change the sign on the door. He even suggests that since the pagans are used to slaughtering oxen for their gods, the church should provide a feast for them on the holy days so they don't feel like they're missing out on the BBQ. You can almost hear the relief in the monk's sigh. It's much easier to bless a feast than to fight a crowd of hungry warriors. This is why, as you look around this ancient English grove, nothing feels unfamiliar. You see the people hanging mistletoe, a sacred plant of the Druids used for fertility rituals. The church didn't ban it, they just frowned a bit and let it stay, though they never quite let it inside the church building itself. Which is why you kiss under it in the hallway, not the pew. You see the Yule log we watched burn in the north. Now it's burning in the hearth of a Christian monastery. The genius of this experiment was its fluidity. It was a cultural absorption. You watch as the scary, darker elements of the winter solstice are softened. The wild hunt of Odin becomes a procession of saints. The sacrifice of the boar becomes the Christmas ham. The magic isn't removed, it is baptized. However, not everything fit perfectly. You notice a group of locals off to the side, whispering. They're still lighting fires on the hills, still leaving bowls of milk for the spirits. The church calls this superstition, but the people just call it tradition. You realize that beneath the official doctrine, the old heartbeat of the pagan world is still thumping away, strong and steady. The Christmas you're watching form is a patchwork quilt, stitched together with political savvy and a deep understanding of human psychology. You feel a sense of admiration for this survival strategy. By bending, the holiday didn't break. If the church had tried to ban the fun, Christmas might have been a solemn, dour affair that nobody looked forward to. Instead, by absorbing the joy, the food, and the lights, they created a juggernaut. The mist in the grove begins to thicken, swirling around the ancient oaks. The sound of the monk chanting in Latin blends with the rustling of the wind in the leaves. You feel the timeline moving forward again. The foundation has been laid. The date is fixed. The pagan rituals have been given a Christian gloss. But humans are humans, and you can't mandate holiness. As the scene dissolves, you hear a sound that is decidedly not holy. It is the sound of a lute, a drum, and a raucous, belly-shaking laugh. You're leaving the serious, strategic halls of the church and the misty forests of conversion. You're heading toward the high medieval period, where the holy day is about to go completely off the rails. The church may have invented Christmas, but the people are out to hijack it. The solemn scent of incense fades, replaced by the smell of spilled ale and roasted goose. The quiet chanting is drowned out by the noise of a street party that would make a frat house look like a library. You are about to meet the Lord of Misrule. The polite, hushed negotiations of the early church fade behind you. The smell of incense and the intellectual quiet of the basilica are instantly blown away by a gust of raw, winter wind. You stumble slightly, your boots sinking into freezing mud. You've landed feet first in the high Middle Ages, perhaps in a bustling English market town or a cramped street in Paris, sometime in the 14th century. If you're expecting the Silent Night version of Christmas, the one with the sleeping village and the peaceful snow, you're in for a shock. The scene before you is not a silent night. It is a riotous day. The air is thick with the smoke of roasting meat, the tang of spilled ale, and a cacophony of shouting, singing, and drums. This is the era of the 12 days of Christmas, a period where the entire agricultural engine of society ground to a halt. The plough was put away, the spinning wheel was covered, and the world gave itself over to what can only be described as a 2-week bender. You pull your cloak tight against the chill and weave through the crowd. The people here are poor, their lives defined by hard labour and strict hierarchy. But today, Their faces are flushed with joy and strong drink. You notice a group of men stumbling out of a tavern, singing a song that is definitely not a hymn. They are wassailing. You remember the Norse longhouse where they toasted to health. This is the medieval evolution of that tradition. They carry a large wooden bowl adorned with ribbons, filled with a hot, spiced cider called lamb's wool, so named because the roasted apples floating in it look like tufts of soft wool. They aren't just drinking, they're going door to door, demanding to be served. You watch them bang on the door of a wealthy merchant's house. "Wassel, wassel," they shout. It sounds friendly, but there is an edge to it, a subtle threat. The lyrics of their song give it away. "We've got a little purse made of stretching leather skin. We want a little of your money and line it well within." It's a transaction. Give us drink and money, and we will bless your house. Refuse us, and well, things might get broken. You realise this is the great-grandfather of trick or treat, masked in Christmas cheer. Suddenly, the crowd parts. You hear the clatter of bells and the banging of pots. A procession is coming down the muddy street. Leading it is a man who looks absolutely ridiculous. He is wearing a crown made of paper and holly, and a patchwork robe that mocks the fine velvet of a king. He is riding a donkey backward, holding a ham bone like a sceptre. You're looking at the Lord of Misrule. In Scotland they call him the Abbot of Unreason. In France, the Prince des Sots. This figure is the beating heart of the medieval Christmas. Just like in the Roman Saturnalia you visited earlier, this is a world turned upside down. For 12 days, the peasant becomes the king, and the serious rules of society are suspended. You watch as the Lord of Misrule spots a local magistrate, a man who usually hands out fines and punishments. The Lord points his ham-bone sceptre at the magistrate and commands, "You hop on one leg and sing like a chicken." And the magistrate does it. The crowd roars with laughter. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated release. You can feel the tension of the year evaporating. The strict social pressure cooker is letting off steam. Historians still argue whether these rituals of rebellion were a genuine threat to the social order, or, as the anthropologist Max Gluckman suggested, a safety valve that actually strengthened the system by allowing people to blow off steam in a controlled way, by letting the peasants play king for a week. The real kings ensured they wouldn't try to be king for the rest of the year. You slip away from the noisy street and duck into the local parish church, seeking a moment of quiet. But even here, the madness has infiltrated. You see a small boy, perhaps 12 years old, dressed in full bishop's vestments mitre, cope and staff. He is sitting on the bishop's throne, looking small and serious. This is the boy bishop. On St. Nicholas's Day, December 6th, the choir boys would elect one of their own to lead the church. He would hold office until Holy Innocents' Day on December 28th. You watch as the real clergy, the priests and canons, sit in the lowly choir stalls, while the children conduct the service. It's charming, but also a bit subversive. You hear the boy preach a sermon usually written by an adult. To be fair, that gently scolds the adults for their greed and lack of faith. It's a kid say the darndest things moment, but with the full weight of the church behind it. Back outside, the sun has set, and the character of the party changes. It gets darker, both literally and figuratively. You see figures moving in the shadows, their faces blackened with soot or hidden behind terrifying masks made of animal skins. These are the mummers. You press yourself against a timber-framed wall to let them pass. They are silent now, moving with a strange, loping gait. Mumming was a form of folk theatre, but it was also an excuse for anonymity. When you wear a mask, you can get away with anything. You watch them enter a house to perform a crude play, usually featuring St. George fighting a dragon or a Turkish knight. The acting is terrible, The swords are wooden, but the energy is electric. There is a sense of danger here that our modern Christmas lacks. In 1418, the City of London actually issued a proclamation forbidding mumming with masks, because too many people were using the disguise to settle old scores or rob their neighbours. It seems the line between festive holiday visitor and home invader was terrifyingly thin in the Middle Ages. You drift toward the town square, where a massive bonfire is crackling. The smell of the fire mixes with the scent of spices. The food being consumed is staggering. You look at a trestle table groaning under the weight of the feast. There is no turkey here. The bird hasn't been discovered by Europeans yet. Instead, the centrepiece is a boar's head. You watch as a steward carries the severed head of a wild boar on a silver platter. It is garnished with rosemary and bay leaves, and an apple is wedged in its mouth. The crowd bursts into a carol, the boar's head in hand bare eye, bedecked with bays and rosemary. It is a callback to the Norse sacrifice you witnessed in the snow, a direct line of culinary heritage stretching back 1,000 years. Next to the boar is something even more extravagant, a peacock pie. You stare at it in disbelief. The bird has been roasted, but the skin and feathers were carefully preserved and placed back over the cooked meat. The peacock looks like it is still alive, its iridescent tail fanned out in all its glory. And just to add to the drama, you see the cook has placed a piece of camphor soaked in spirits in the bird's beak and lit it on fire. It is a breathing, fire-spitting dragon of a dinner. It's completely over the top, tacky, and magnificent, the medieval equivalent of a gold leaf steak on Instagram. As the night wears on, the games begin. You watch a group of young people playing hot cockles. It's a baffling game. One person is blindfolded and kneels down, placing their head in someone's lap. The other players then take turns hitting the blindfolded person on the back, and the victim has to guess who hit them. If they guess right, the hitter takes their place. You wince as a burly blacksmith delivers a solid thwack to a giggling milkmaid. It's rough, physical, and flirtatious. It's the kind of game that only makes sense when you've had 3 pints of spiced ale and haven't seen the sun in a week. The noise is overwhelming, the squeal of bagpipes, the shouting of the mummers, the crackle of the fire. But as you watch, you realise something profound about this chaos. It is communal. Nobody is alone on Christmas in the Middle Ages. You couldn't be. Privacy was a luxury the poor didn't have, and the rich didn't want. The doors were open. The great hall of the manor was open to the tenants. The church was open to the beggars. It was a time when the rigid, icy barriers between classes melted, just for a moment, in the heat of the Yule log. You noticed the Yule dough on the tables, little baby-shaped loaves of bread. The bakers gave them as gifts to their customers. It's a small, sweet reminder of the nativity amidst the drunken revelry. A tiny Jesus made of flour and yeast, sitting next to a tankard of ale. The revelry begins to blur. The spinning dancers, the fire-breathing peacock, and the paper-crowned king of misrule swirl into a vortex of colour and noise. You feel the exhaustion of the celebration. 12 days of this intensity is a marathon. You can sense the hangover looming on the horizon, the return to the plough, the return to the rules, the return to the silence of the winter fields. But before the party ends, the world needs something else. It needs a figure who is more than just a chaotic prankster like the Lord of Misrule. It needs someone who embodies the generosity of the season without the anarchy. Someone who can bridge the gap between the holy bishop and the wild spirit of the winter. You feel the heavy, humid air of the medieval town lifting. The smell of mud and roasting meat fades. The shouting dies down to a whisper. You're moving southeast now, and back in time, away from the muddy streets of England to the sun-drenched coast of what is now modern-day Turkey. You're about to meet the man behind the myth, the real person who would eventually be forced into a red suit and made to work the night shift. You leave the raucous, ale-soaked streets of medieval England behind. The sound of the Lord of Misrule's drum fades into a rhythmic, soothing lap of water against stone. The biting cold of the northern winter melts away, replaced by a warm, salty breeze that tangles in your hair. You open your eyes and find yourself squinting in the bright, golden sunlight of the Mediterranean. You're standing on the docks of Myra, a bustling port city in what is now modern-day Turkey. The year is sometime in the early 4th century. The air smells of drying fish, olives, and the hot limestone of the Roman roads. You look around and see a world that is vividly alive, sailors shouting in Greek, merchants haggling over spices, and Roman soldiers patrolling the harbour. It is a far cry from the North Pole. There is no snow here, no reindeer, and certainly no elves. You're here to find the man who started it all. You might be scanning the crowd for a large jolly man in a red velvet suit, but you won't find him. Instead, your gaze lands on a thin, intense figure walking through the market. He wears the simple, heavy robes of a Christian bishop. His skin is weathered by the Anatolian sun, and if you look closely, you might see that his nose has been broken a souvenir, perhaps from the Roman persecution he survived under the Emperor Diocletian. This is Nicholas, Bishop of Myra, the wonder worker. You follow him as he moves through the city. He doesn't ho-ho-ho. He walks with a fierce, protective stride. He's a shepherd in a very literal sense, guarding his flock in a dangerous time. The history books tell us he was born to wealthy parents who died in an epidemic, leaving him a young heir with a massive fortune and a burning desire to give it away. You're witnessing the birth of the gift giver, but his charity isn't about toys, it's about survival. You drift with him until night falls. The city quiets down. You watch as Nicholas approaches a small, dilapidated house on the edge of town. Inside lives a desperate father with 3 daughters. In this time and place, without a dowry, a sum of money to bring to a marriage, a woman has very few options. These 3 girls are facing a life of destitution or, worse, being sold into slavery or prostitution. The father is weeping, broken by his inability to save them. You watch from the shadows as Nicholas approaches the open window. He wants no credit. He is obsessed with anonymity, following the biblical command to not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. He pulls a small bag of gold from his cloak. It's heavy. You hear the soft clink as he tosses it through the window. It lands near the hearth. Some legends say it lands in a shoe. Others say it falls into a stocking that had been hung by the fire to dry. You smile as you realise you're watching the precise moment a global tradition is born. That random trajectory of a bag of gold is the reason you hang a sock on your mantle 1700 years later. He returns 2 more times on separate nights to provide for the 2nd and 3rd daughters. On the 3rd night, the father catches him. You watch the emotional confrontation. The father falls to his knees, trying to kiss Nicholas's hands. But Nicholas is stern. He pulls away, commanding the man, "Give thanks to God, not to me." It is this aggressive humility that defines him. He's not a magical elf. He is a servant trying to stay invisible. But Nicholas isn't just a stealthy philanthropist. As you spend more time in Myra, you realise he has a temper. He is a warrior for his truth. You travel with him to the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. This is the great meeting called by Emperor Constantine to sort out what Christians actually believe. You enter the Grand Hall, filled with hundreds of bishops arguing over theology. You see a heated debate erupt. A priest named Arius is speaking, arguing that Jesus was created by God and is therefore lesser than God. Nicholas is listening, his face growing red with anger. He can't stand it, in a moment that has been scrubbed from our many polite Sunday school lessons. You watch Nicholas stand up, march across the room, and slap Arius across the face. The room goes silent. You can hear a pin drop. Punching a fellow cleric in front of the Emperor is a major breach of protocol. You watch as Nicholas is stripped of his robes and thrown into a jail cell. Historians still argue whether this slapping incident actually happened. It doesn't appear in the earliest records and shows up in later biographies, but the fact that the story survived tells you something about his reputation. He was fiery, he was human. He was the kind of guy who would fight for what he believed in, which is a far cry from the sanitized, cookie-eating grandpa we know today. But the stories get stranger. You drift away from the council and back to the realm of folklore. You find yourself in a roadside inn during a famine. The mood is dark. You sense something terrible has happened here. This brings us to the most famous and most macabre medieval legend of Saint Nicholas I that is definitely not in the modern Christmas canon. The story goes that an evil innkeeper kidnapped 3 students, murdered them, and pickled them in a brine tub to sell as pork during the food shortage. You watch as Nicholas enters the inn. He senses the evil immediately. He walks to the wooden tub, makes the sign of the cross, and the 3 boys emerge, alive and whole. It is a resurrection story. This pickled boy's miracle became his calling card in the Middle Ages. You might see old paintings of Nicholas standing next to a tub with 3 little figures popping out. Over time, people forgot the gruesome murder and pickling part and just remembered the "he loves children" part. But standing there in the candlelight of the legend, you realise that his patronage of children started not with toys, but with protection from the darkest evils of the world. As the centuries pass, you feel the landscape around you shifting. You're no longer in Myra, you're drifting west, carried by the currents of the sea. Nicholas is the patron saint of sailors because he once calmed a storm, and his reputation travels on the bows of ships. He becomes a superstar. By the late Middle Ages, he is arguably the most popular saint in Europe, second only to the Virgin Mary. But his physical body is about to go on a journey, too. You fast forward to the year 1087. You're back in Myra, but the city is in decline, threatened by invading armies. You see a group of Italian sailors from the city of Bari creeping into the crypt of the church. They aren't here to pray, they're here to heist. You watch them smash the marble sarcophagus. The smell of manna, a sweet, rose-scented oil that was said to exude from his bones, fills the air. They scoop up the skeleton of the saint, wrap it in cloth, and run back to their ships. It is a holy kidnapping. They sail back to Italy, and that is why he is often known as Nicholas of Bari. You follow the bones to Italy. A massive basilica is built to house them. You see thousands of pilgrims flocking to the site. Nicholas has become an industry. His feast day, December 6th, becomes a massive celebration. It is the little Christmas before the big Christmas. You see parents giving gifts to their children on the night of December 5th, telling them that the good bishop brought them. The imagery begins to soften. The fiery defender of Nicaea is slowly morphing. You see artists painting him. They keep the bishop's mitre, the tall hat, and the crozier, the shepherd's staff. But his face grows kinder, rounder. He is becoming a grandfather figure to the entire continent. In the medieval marketplaces you visit, the pawnbrokers have adopted his symbol 3 gold balls, representing the 3 bags of gold he threw for the dowries. Even today, if you walk past a pawn shop, you're looking at a stylized reference to Saint Nicholas. It's a quirky connection. The same man who brings toys to toddlers is the patron saint of people hawking their watches for quick cash. You feel a sense of warmth and continuity watching this. For 1,000 years, the man was the answer to the winter darkness. He was the benevolent protector. If you were a sailor in a storm, a child in danger, or a father in debt, Nicholas was the one you called. He was the personal human face of grace. But the winds of history are fickle. As you stand in the candlelit glory of the Basilica of San Nicola in Bari, you hear a distant rumble. It is not a storm at sea. It is the sound of a hammer nailing a piece of paper to a church door in Germany. The Reformation is coming. The Protestants are about to ask a very dangerous question. Why are we praying to these saints? And when they decide to cancel the saints, Nicholas will be first on the chopping block. The beloved bishop is about to be fired. But you can't keep a good legend down. He is about to go underground, surviving in the shadows and in the stubborn traditions of the common people, waiting for his chance to re-emerge in a new disguise. The golden light of Italy begins to fade. The smell of incense and sea salt dissipates. The warm Mediterranean breeze turns into a cold, grey draught. You are moving north again, towards a time of stern faces and black coats. The party is over. The Lord of Misrule has been arrested, and the bishop has been banished. You're about to enter the era where Christmas was cancelled. The warm, golden glow of the Italian basilica fades from your vision. The scent of sea salt and myrrh dissolves, replaced by a much starker, sharper atmosphere. The air grows cold and damp, heavy with the smell of coal smoke and rain-soaked wool. You find yourself standing on a cobblestone street in London. The year is 1647. The sky is a flat, unyielding grey, reflecting the mood of the city below. You look around, expecting to see the chaotic joy of the medieval Christmas you witnessed earlier. You listen for the bells, the carolers, the Lord of Misrule banging his drum, but there is only silence. The church bells are still, the tavern doors are shut tight. Most jarring of all, you see the shops are open. Blacksmiths are hammering hot iron, bakers are kneading dough, and merchants are hawking their wares. It is December 25th, but it looks like any other Tuesday. You have stepped into the era of the Puritan ban. You're witnessing the only...
Dear friends, if this story brought you even a little peace tonight, just imagine how many more relaxing bedtime stories are waiting for you on this channel. So, please like this video, share it with someone who also loves calm stories, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Make sure to turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to know whenever a new story is uploaded. And now, YouTube has introduced something new. It's called Hype. By giving our channel a little hype, you can help us reach so many more people who need rest and relaxation. Your support truly means the world. Finally, let us know in the comments how tonight's story felt for you. Every single word of feedback inspires us to create more magical bedtime journeys.